Alright, let's make a start, shall we? Today's build will be centered around the humongous RTX 2070 Strix paired with what has become my favorite CPU, the Ryzen 5 5600X. Someone recently and rightly pointed out to me in the comments on one of the videos, it's not the fastest gaming CPU anymore owing to Intel's new offerings, but it does provide excellent value for money when purchased used. For any building can commence, we need to free this thing from my test bench. Take off the cooler as I used the last of my thermal grizzly fancy paste to put it on, and I won't take off the RAM either. No particular reason, I just forgot to show it to the camera. Just know it's a 16GB kit of 3600 Mbps CL16 ballistics RAM. Doesn't really get much better than this for a mid-range Ryzen, I should think. I was going to pre-proclaim this the fastest PC I ever built on the channel, and I even wrote that into the script. Once I got around to finishing the benchmarks, it became apparent it's more of a tie or close shave versus the RTX 3060 build I did last week. Sorry about the shameless plug, but if you want to see exactly what I'm talking about, the link is in the description. The board I'll be using is a fully featured high-end X470 Aorus Ultra Gaming that is more than capable of extracting every last ounce of performance from the CPU. Very impressed with this board as it originally retailed at around 140 to 160 pounds and it's got more features than most X570 boards that are double that price. The thing that was a bit of a letdown, but expected, was the fact that my intended memory kit, a 4400 Mbps Viper, was not compatible with this board. It wasn't on the QVL list, and in actuality it wouldn't have been any faster in real terms as this 3600 Mbps kit most likely provides more performance. Hey, this is the internet, so bigger numbers equals more better. Sacrifice you do have to make while going X470 is the lack of PCIe Gen 4 as it was explicitly locked out by AMD. Since both the SSD and the GPU I am going to be using are both PCIe Gen 3, it really does not matter at all for this build. In case you are wondering what the heck I am doing there, the standoff for the SSD heatsink shield has come off and I am fixing it to the screw. At the end of the day, it's just aesthetic as the WD Black 500GB SSD will never get hot enough to throttle in this system. Next, the Cooler Master 750W PSU needs to go into this brand new MSI Mag 100R case that I got for a good deal on Amazon Warehouse. It comes with 3 fans, 2 of which are ARGB and all 3 are PWM, and the layout is actually pretty great. Kind of like building a PC on easy mode in this case, with a massive bonus that it actually looks great at the end. I don't usually like to have the cooler installed when I'm positioning the motherboard if it is an IAO because it's easy to damage the fins. Probably so in this case where I have ample access to the motherboard backplate, but since I don't want to replace the CPU, I had to make do. Now that the motherboard is in, I'll install an extra ARGB fan at the exhaust and proceed to mount the radiator and its corresponding fan at the top of the case. It really doesn't matter where the fan is positioned, considering it's a non-RGB fan I'm using. I actually like the looks of the bare radiator sticking down like that. After doing some cable management and also installing a 500GB hard drive, it's time to get the GPU in. And here's my first and only major complaint about this case: the fact that it has breakaway shield. It's unfortunately very easy to damage the motherboard while trying to rip out these bastards. If I had noticed this little detail, I definitely would have taken out before installing the motherboard. Like, motherboard I/O shields really do belong in the past. I ran into a bit of trouble getting the GPU properly seated and installed, and after I did that I realized that the brackets that is supposed to hold it down does not go in with the card already installed, so I had to take it out again and faff about some more. Speaking of this card, it really is a beast. It has a BIOS selector that switches between a 0 RPM fan mode and a more aggressive profile, brand new fans, link in the description in the top right corner to the video where I changed those, and it is an all-around unit as all Strix cards are, with massive overclock potential. I don't do overclock benchmarks in these videos, but boy can this thing really clock both the core and the memory sky high. There really isn't anything bad I can say about it. That is it. Time to push the button and admire the RGB. Here are some pictures of the finished product. I was also pleasantly surprised by the fact that there is a seamless handoff between the case and motherboard RGB control. In most instances, it's a pain to synchronize them, but here it happened automatically. Start as per usual with Heaven, and here I was expecting this card to do very well, and indeed it did not disappoint at 206 FPS on average. Closest competitor in terms of cost and performance for this GPU would be a 3060, which so happens I tested last week. Spoiler alert though, the RT and Tensor cores in the Ampere card are much better, especially when running both ray tracing and DLSS at the same time, but Heaven has none of that as it is an ancient 13 13-year-old benchmark, so here the 2070 crushes it with raw raster performance. Superposition is a much newer benchmark, but it still does not include any vendor-specific features, so here too the 2070 comes out on top with a 608 point difference or roughly 3.7 FPS. I know, not massive by any means, but a victory nonetheless. Rocket League, it is very hard to crown a winner, although technically I would have to give it to the 3060 system, but I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the GPU, this game being more of a CPU test these days. Regardless, frame rates in excess of 300 FPS mean that no matter what, you will have a great time. In Fortnite, I went for epic with quality DLSS and turned off all other ray tracing features as they only serve to tank the frame rate without providing anything in return in this particular scenario. If I can't tell if it's on or off, then it's not worth it for me, but your mileage may vary on that. That being said, on the exact same map with the same settings, there was no practical difference between the 3060 and 2070, with the raw numbers showing the 2070 just a bit in the lead, but really within run-to-run variation on this Walnut World map. Horizon Zero Dawn with ultimate quality and DLSS finally favored the newer 3060 by 9 FPS, but then again it also favored the 5600X on the X570 platform without PBO, versus the same CPU on the X470 with PBO enabled, so please take this result with a pinch of salt. It doesn't entirely make perfect sense and I can't really figure out why that is. Regardless, at 113 FPS this game looks and feels amazing, so no complaints there. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I again encountered a funny one where the 3060 system is 3 FPS faster on average, but I would definitely prefer the 2070 here. 77 FPS on average with 1% at 56 and 0.1% at 47, it was far smoother than the higher averaging 3060, but with 1% at 51 and 0.1% at 32. Ouch. I could really feel the stuttering was definitely more pronounced on the MPS system, and I did make a note of it at the time, but that might also be attributed to other factors, so here I'm going to take this as a virtual tie. In Days Gone, at very high settings, any difference between the two systems were within run-to-run variation, so again a tie, this time without any asterisks attached. Both had about 92 FPS on average in this game and no stuttering. In Control, I was fully expecting a 3060 to take the lead owing to its far superior RT and tensor cores. With around 10 FPS extra or 12% more performance, it didn't really run away with it. This is by far the most ray tracing heavy game I test. I wanted the difference to be bigger owing to the fact that in running DLSS and RT features concurrently, Ampere is supposed to be much better, but then I remember the 3050's 34 FPS on average in this game, so I decided to promptly move on. Far Cry 6 posted identical results with 86 FPS on average, and while the 3060 had a 1 FPS higher maximum and the 2060 had a 2 FPS higher minimum. That's significant in any way? No, it's simply run-to-run variation, so I would not read anything into it. In this title, the two cards perform exactly the same. Even though FSR does not use RT cores for its upscaling, its newer architecture seems to provide the 3060 a bit of a leg up here, so we can bridge the gap to the technically still more powerful 2070. Warzone is not directly comparable between runs because I let it choose its own setting. I've been meaning to standardize these, but because I really am not a habitual Warzone player, the idea was that it is what most people are going to get, as they would let the game choose whatever it wants. Most of the settings don't make a lot of sense for me on a competitive shooter, but it still ended up posting about 123 FPS on average in this introductory training map, so it's all good, meaning can be easily further customized to your playstyle. And finally Cyberpunk, another RT heavy title where I turn everything up to 11 settings wise. Again, the limiting factor by far is the RT implementation with DLSS set to quality, greatly helping matters. I was kinda expecting a 3060 to run away with it, as the 2070's extra raster oomph is going unused, and it's a scenario where both DLSS and ray tracing are on and at the same time. No, the 2070 was only about 3.5 FPS on average slower. Not quite run-to-run variation, but not far off either. I came into this thinking that the 2070 will be an easy recommendation over a 3060 if they are at the same price point, but now I really am not so sure. I personally will still pick the 2070 as I feel it ever so slightly edges ahead overall, but it is clear it is a lot more nuanced and it really depends on the sort of titles you habitually play. Fortunately, while we are fast approaching the end of the GPU drought, we are still not there yet, with the 2070 being closer in price to a 3050 than a 3060, so in the here and now, the market condition crowned the 2070 as the superior card. The caveat that is liable to change in the future, and I'm betting it will. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and have a great day.